The smell of my mother's famous roasted chicken filled the dining room of our family's suburban home, but the tension was thick enough to cut with a scalpel. Sunday dinners at the Martinez household had become a monthly ritual of disappointment, at least where I was concerned. I sat across from my father, Dr. Antonio Martinez, whose cardiology practice had made him one of the most respected physicians in the city, watching him carve the bird with surgical precision. "So, Robert," my sister Carmen began, her voice carrying that familiar note of forced cheerfulness that meant trouble was coming. "How's the research going?" She couldn't quite hide the skepticism in her voice. At 34, Carmen was everything our parents had dreamed of: a successful emergency room physician, married to another doctor with 2 perfect children who called our father Abuelo, with the kind of reverence I'd never managed to earn. I took a sip of water, buying time. How do you explain 5 years of 18-hour days in a cramped laboratory to people who measure success in patient visits and insurance reimbursements? It's going well. We're making real progress on the Alzheimer's treatment protocol. Dad's knife paused mid-slice. "Protocol," he repeated, his accent thickening the way it always did when he was frustrated. 32 years old and you're playing with test tubes instead of treating real patients. Your mother and I sacrificed everything to put you through Harvard Medical School, and for what? So you could waste your degree on fantasy research. My mother, Isabella, reached across the table to squeeze my father's arm. "Antonio, please. Not today." "No, Isabella. Today is exactly when we need to discuss this." He set down the carving knife and fixed me with the same stare that had intimidated residents for decades. "Robert, you had everything. Top of your class at Harvard, offers from every major hospital in Boston, and you threw it all away for what? Some pipe dream about curing diseases that have stumped real scientists for centuries." I felt the familiar tightness in my chest that came with these conversations. They didn't understand that walking away from my residency at Massachusetts General hadn't been a failure. It had been the hardest and most necessary decision of my life. When my grandmother, Abuela Rosa, died from complications of Alzheimer's 3 years into my surgical training, something inside me shifted. I couldn't keep cutting into people when I could be working on preventing the diseases that stole their minds first. "Real scientists," I repeated quietly. "Dad, I am a real scientist. I have a medical degree and a PhD in biochemistry. The research I'm doing—" "Research?" my brother-in-law Miguel interrupted, laughing as he helped himself to more wine. "Come on, Rob. When was the last time you actually made any money from this research? Carmen and I just bought our second house. My practice is booming. You're 32 and still living in that tiny apartment, driving a car from college." Carmen shot her husband a warning look, but the damage was done. The conversation had taken its predictable turn toward my financial failures. They measured success in square footage and luxury car payments. I measured it in molecular structures and clinical trial results. "Money isn't everything," I said, though even I could hear how weak it sounded. Dad's fork clattered against his plate. "Money? This isn't about money, Mijo. This is about purpose. About using the gifts God gave you to help people. Real people, not theoretical patients in your research papers that nobody reads." The thing was, people were reading my papers. The latest publication in the Journal of Alzheimer's Research had been downloaded over 50,000 times in the first month. 3 major pharmaceutical companies had reached out about licensing opportunities. But explaining that to my family felt like trying to describe color to someone who'd never seen. "I am helping people," I said, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. "The compound we've developed." "Compound?" Dad waved his hand dismissively. "You sound like a chemistry student, not a doctor. When I was your age, I was already saving lives every day. Heart surgeries, emergency procedures. Real medicine." My phone buzzed on the table. I glanced at the caller ID and my heart nearly stopped. Dr. Patricia Williams, Director of the FDA Center for Drug Evaluation and Research. The call I'd been waiting for, hoping for, dreading for the past 6 months. "I need to take this," I said, reaching for the phone. "Absolutely not," Dad snapped. "We're having dinner. Family time. Whatever sales call or research survey it is can wait." The phone kept buzzing. Dr. Williams rarely called on Sundays and never without a specific reason. This could be the news that would change everything, or the news that would confirm my family's worst fears about my chosen path. "Dad, this is important. It's the FDA." Miguel snorted. "The FDA? What, are they calling to shut down your little lab? Before I could respond or step away from the table, my finger accidentally hit the speaker button as I answered. Dr. Martinez? Dr. Williams' crisp voice filled the dining room. This is Dr. Patricia Williams from the FDA. I hope I'm not interrupting anything important. The entire table fell silent. Even my nephews stopped chattering in the living room, as if the serious tone of an official government call had somehow reached their young ears. Dr. Williams, I managed, my mouth suddenly dry. No, you're not interrupting. How can I help you? Actually, I'm calling to help you, she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. Dr. Martinez, I'm delighted to inform you that your new drug application for RMZ-847 has received full FDA approval for the treatment of early-stage Alzheimer's disease. The words hit the dining room like a physical force. Dad's fork clattered to his plate. Carmen's wine glass stopped halfway to her lips. Miguel's smug expression melted into confusion. Furthermore, Dr. Williams continued, oblivious to the drama she was causing in my parents' dining room, I understand congratulations are in order on another front. Our sources indicate that pre-orders from major healthcare systems have already reached $2.3 billion, making this one of the most anticipated drug launches in recent history. The silence that followed was deafening. I stared at the phone trying to process what I'd just heard. $2.3 billion in pre-orders. For my compound. For the molecule I'd designed in that tiny lab my family dismissed as a hobby. Dr. Martinez? Dr. Williams' voice crackled through the speaker. Are you there? Yes, I whispered, then cleared my throat. Yes, I'm here. Dr. Williams, thank you. This is incredible news. You've done remarkable work, Doctor. The clinical trial results were extraordinary. A 78% reduction in cognitive decline progression in early-stage patients. We've fast-tracked this approval because the medical community recognizes what you've accomplished here. You're going to change millions of lives. I looked around the table at my family's stunned faces. Dad's hands were trembling slightly. Mom had tears in her eyes, though I couldn't tell if they were from pride or shock. Carmen looked like she was trying to solve a complex mathematical equation in her head. There's one more thing, Dr. Williams added. The CDC would like to discuss a government partnership for research into other neurodegenerative conditions. Are you available for a call tomorrow morning? Yes, I said, my voice stronger now. Absolutely. Excellent. Congratulations again, Dr. Martinez. The medical community is lucky to have minds like yours pushing the boundaries of what's possible. The call ended, leaving my family's dining room in complete silence except for the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. I set the phone down carefully as if it might explode if handled roughly. Dad was the first to speak, his voice barely above a whisper. $2 billion? $2.3 billion, I corrected gently. In pre-orders alone. That's just the beginning. Miguel's face had gone pale. But you live in that tiny apartment. You drive a 12-year-old Honda. I smiled for the first time in months. Because I've been reinvesting everything back into the research. Every spare dollar goes into the lab, into better equipment, into hiring the best minds in the field. Did you think I was doing this as a hobby? Carmen set down her wine glass with shaking hands. Rob, I don't understand. If your research was this successful, why didn't you tell us? The question hung in the air, loaded with years of disappointment and misunderstanding. I looked at each of them, remembering every conversation where they'd questioned my choices, every family gathering where I'd been made to feel like the failure. Would you have believed me? I asked quietly. 3 months ago, when Dad was lecturing me about wasting my degree, would any of you have believed that I was working on something that could change the world? The silence was answer enough. The thing is, I continued, standing up from the table, I didn't need you to believe in me. I believed in the science. I believed in the work. And now millions of families won't have to watch their grandmothers disappear the way we watched Abuela Rosa fade away. Mom started crying then, really crying, her shoulders shaking with sobs she'd been holding back for months. Mijo, I'm so sorry. We didn't understand. Dad stood up slowly, his proud posture crumbling. Robert, how long have you known? About the approval? We submitted the application 8 months ago, I said. The clinical trials took 3 years before that. I've been working on this compound for 5 years, Dad. 5 years of 12-hour days, weekends in the lab living on ramen noodles and hope. But the money, Miguel stammered. Where did you get the funding for all this research? I pulled out my phone and opened the documents I'd been carrying around for weeks, waiting for the right moment to share them. I founded Martinez Pharmaceutical Research 3 years ago. We've received $45 million in research grants from the National Institutes of Health, plus private funding from 3 major investment firms who believed in the work. I swiped to the next screen. The company is currently valued at $800 million, based on the drug's market potential. And now with FDA approval. I paused, letting the implications sink in. Conservative estimates put the company's value at somewhere between $3 and $5 billion. Carmen's mouth fell open. You're a billionaire? On paper, I said carefully. And only if the drug performs as well commercially as it did in trials. But yes, if current projections hold, I'll be financially comfortable. Dad sank back into his chair, looking older than I'd ever seen him. All this time I thought you were failing. I thought you were throwing your life away. I know what you thought, I said, not unkindly. And I understand why. You measure success in patients saved, surgeries performed, immediate impact. But Dad, if this drug works the way we think it will, I won't save hundreds of lives. I'll save millions. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from Dr. Sarah Chin, my research partner and the brilliant biochemist who'd helped make all of this possible. CNN wants to interview you tomorrow. And the Times. And basically every major news outlet. You ready to be famous? I showed the message to my family. This is just the beginning. The FDA approval opens doors to research partnerships, government contracts, international distribution deals. We're not just treating Alzheimer's anymore. We're building a platform that could address Parkinson's, ALS, multiple sclerosis. Miguel, who'd spent the entire dinner mocking my career choices, now looked sick. Rob, I owe you an apology. We all do. You don't owe me anything, I said, sitting back down. But maybe next time, before you judge someone's choices, you could ask them to explain what they're actually doing. Dad reached across the table and took my hand, his own still trembling slightly. Mijo, I'm proud of you. I should have said that years ago, but I was too stubborn to see what you were building. You raised me to help people, I said. That's exactly what I'm doing. Just not the way you expected. Mom wiped her eyes with her napkin. Tell us about the drug. How does it work? For the next 2 hours, I explained 5 years of research in terms my family could understand. I showed them the molecular structure diagrams, the clinical trial data, the patient testimonials from families who'd watched their loved ones regain precious months of clarity. Mrs. Patterson was our first trial patient, I said, pulling up her photo on my phone. 73 years old, diagnosed with early-stage Alzheimer's 2 years ago. After 6 months on RMZ-847, her cognitive function tests improved by 65%. She's back to reading novels, playing cards with her grandchildren, remembering birthdays. Carmen was crying now too. That could have been Abuela Rosa. That's exactly why I do this work, I said. Every family should have more time with their grandmothers. My phone rang again. This time it was Dr. Chin, and I could hear the excitement in her voice even before I answered. Rob, you need to see the news. We're trending on Twitter. The stock market is already reacting. And get this, the European Medicines Agency wants to fast-track approval for the EU market. I put the call on speaker so my family could hear. Sarah, I'm here with my family. They just found out about the FDA approval. Oh my God, they didn't know? Sarah's voice filled with delight. Dr. Martinez, your son is a genius. Literally. The compound he designed is going to change medicine forever. Dad leaned toward the phone. Dr. Chin, this is Robert's father. Thank you for believing in his work when his own family didn't understand it. Sir, your son is the most dedicated researcher I've ever worked with. He's slept in the lab more nights than he's slept at home. This success isn't luck. It's 5 years of brilliant, obsessive, tireless work. After the call ended, the dinner conversation took on a completely different tone. Instead of questioning my choices, my family wanted to understand them. They asked about the research process, the regulatory approval timeline, the business structure I'd built around the science. You know what the strangest part is? I said as Mom served the dessert we'd forgotten about during all the phone calls. I almost gave up last year. The third clinical trial hit some complications, funding was tight, and I was exhausted. I actually drafted an email to Dad asking if there were any positions open in his practice. Dad's eyes widened. What stopped you? Abuela Rosa, I said simply. I kept thinking about her final year, how she'd forget our names but still remember the smell of her garden. How she'd ask the same questions over and over, trapped in a mind that was betraying her. I couldn't give up knowing there were millions of other grandmothers out there facing the same fate. Miguel, who'd been quiet since his earlier embarrassment, finally spoke up. Rob, I need to apologize. I've been treating you like you were some kind of failure, when really you were building something incredible. I feel like an idiot. Don't, I said. I understand why you thought what you thought. I chose to keep this quiet to let you all think I was struggling. Maybe I wanted to prove something to myself first. Carmen leaned forward. What's next? With the company, I mean. I pulled out my laptop and opened the presentation I'd been working on for potential investors. Next we scale. We're hiring 50 new researchers, opening labs in Boston and San Francisco, and beginning trials on compounds for 3 other neurodegenerative diseases. The slides showed projected revenues, patient impact estimates, and partnership opportunities. The numbers were staggering, but more importantly, the potential to help people was enormous. Within 5 years, I explained, we hope to have treatments available for early-stage Parkinson's, ALS, and a rare genetic condition called Huntington's disease. Each one represents hundreds of thousands of patients who currently have no real treatment options. Dad studied the slides with the same intensity he'd once brought to surgical planning. This is remarkable, Mijo. You're not just treating diseases, you're building an entire pipeline of cures. That's the goal, I said. Use the success of the Alzheimer's drug to fund research into other conditions that have been neglected because they're too complex or too rare to be profitable for traditional pharmaceutical companies. My phone buzzed with another call. This time it was my research coordinator calling from the lab. Dr. Martinez, sorry to bother you on a Sunday, but the phones haven't stopped ringing since the FDA announcement hit the news. We've got interview requests from 60 Minutes, calls from researchers at Johns Hopkins and Stanford wanting to collaborate, and 3 different venture capital firms trying to schedule meetings this week. I looked around the table at my family's amazed faces. Transfer the interview requests to our PR firm, schedule the collaboration calls for Wednesday afternoon, and tell the VC firms that we're not looking for additional funding right now. Got it. Oh, and Dr. Martinez? Congratulations. You deserve every bit of this success. After ending the call, I closed my laptop and looked at my family. You know what the best part of all this is? The money. Miguel guessed, still looking somewhat shell-shocked. The validation from the medical community? Carmen suggested. I shook my head. The best part is that next Sunday when we're sitting around this table we can talk about something other than my career failures. Dad laughed, really laughed for the first time in months. I think we can manage that. Though I suspect we'll be talking about your success instead. Maybe, I said. But honestly, I'd rather hear about Carmen's latest emergency room adventures or Miguel's new cases. I've spent 5 years thinking about nothing but molecular structures and clinical trials. I'd love to just be part of the family again instead of the family disappointment. Mom reached over and squeezed my hand. You were never a disappointment, Mijo. We just didn't understand what you were trying to accomplish. I know, I said. And I should have tried harder to explain it instead of just expecting you to trust me. As we cleared the dinner dishes, my phone lit up with notifications. News alerts, social media mentions, congratulatory texts from colleagues I hadn't heard from in years. The story was spreading fast. Young doctor develops breakthrough Alzheimer's treatment, builds billion-dollar company in secret. This is surreal, I said, scrolling through the messages. 3 hours ago I was the family failure. Now I'm apparently the next big thing in biotech. Carmen bumped my shoulder playfully. Maybe don't let it go to your head too much. You're still the little brother who used to eat glue in kindergarten. I never ate glue, I protested. No, but you did dissect earthworms in the backyard when you were 8, Mom added. I should have known then that you were going to be a scientist. As the evening wound down, Dad pulled me aside for a private conversation. Robert, I owe you more than an apology. I owe you an explanation. We stood in his study, surrounded by his medical diplomas and awards, the shrine to traditional medical success that had intimidated me for years. When you left your residency, he continued, I felt like I'd failed as a father. Like I hadn't taught you the value of hard work and helping people. I couldn't understand how someone as smart as you could throw away such a promising career. Dad. Let me finish, he said gently. What I realize now is that you were working harder than any of us. You were helping people in a way that I never could. And instead of supporting you, I made you feel like you had to prove yourself. I looked at the wall of achievements, thinking about all the times I'd stood in this room feeling inadequate. I always wanted to make you proud. I just couldn't figure out how to do it your way. You did make me proud, he said firmly. You made me proud the day you decided to follow your passion instead of my expectations. I was just too stubborn to see it. He paused, looking at his diplomas. You know what the difference is between us? I learned to fix hearts that were already broken. You learned to prevent minds from breaking in the first place. That's not just medicine, that's magic. That night, as I drove home to my tiny apartment in my 12-year-old Honda, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this moment. 5 years of 18-hour days, countless failed experiments, moments of doubt when I wondered if my family was right about my choices. But I also thought about Mrs. Patterson, who could now remember her grandchildren's names. About the clinical trial participants who'd regained months or years of cognitive function. About the millions of families who might never have to watch their loved ones disappear into the fog of Alzheimer's. The money was nice. $2.3 billion in pre-orders was certainly more than I'd ever imagined earning. But the real reward was knowing that the work mattered, that years of sacrifice had led to something that could genuinely change the world. My phone buzzed with one final message of the day. Dr. Williams from the FDA. Dr. Martinez wanted to add one more congratulation. The Medical Review Board was unanimous in their approval. In 30 years of drug evaluation, I've rarely seen clinical trial results as compelling as yours. Thank you for your dedication to this work. I saved the message and smiled. Tomorrow would bring interviews, meetings, and the whirlwind of sudden fame. But tonight, for the first time in 5 years, I felt like I could finally rest. The family disappointment had become the family success story. But more importantly, the research that had started with my grandmother's lost memories was now hope for millions of other grandmothers around the world. Sometimes the best revenge isn't proving people wrong. It's proving yourself right in ways that help everyone, including the people who doubted you. As I pulled into my apartment complex, I made a mental note to call a realtor in the morning. Not because I needed a bigger place to impress anyone, but because I was finally ready to build something permanent. A home base for the next phase of research. A place where my family would always be welcome, and a reminder that success looks different for everyone. The boy who once dissected earthworms in his backyard had grown up to dissect diseases instead. And maybe, just maybe, that was exactly what the world needed.